Congressman Russ Carnahan is from Missouri. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And Republican Congressman Mike Coffman of Colorado is a member of the Armed Services Committee and also a man who served his country in uniform. I always like to say thank you, sir, for your service to start tonight. Here's what Senator John McCain, another man who served this country, said about the president on Face the Nation yesterday. Let's listen.
I'd like to see the president be stronger than he has been, although I appreciate the comments that he made yesterday. I think we ought to have America lead. When you look at the statements by President Sarkozy, Chancellor Merkel, and Prime Minister Brown have been much stronger. We should lead. And I also think he should point out that this is not just an Iranian issue. This is an American issue.
What do you make of that, Congressman Coffman? What do you mean it's an American issue? It's Iran. It's their election. Why is it an American issue? Maybe I'm being the devil's advocate here, but explain.
Well, you know, the president really set the stage for this in his Cairo speech when he talked about the need for these regimes to move toward democracy, to move toward freedom. And I think that the president certainly could have been stronger in his statements. And we look at what President Sarkozy of France has said, when we look at what Chancellor Merkel of Germany has said, much stronger comments. I think that the Iranian people on the streets are looking for this president to be stronger on this issue.
What do you think would be the significance if one of those people on the streets of Iran were to carry a small American flag? What would be the significance, Congressman?
Well, certainly I think we're not inciting that, but
well, you know what would happen.
Well,
you know what would happen if there was any sign that we were involved in any way with that Iranian, well, it's a silent revolution in a way, but if we were involved in that in any way, wouldn't it kill it?
You know, we have to be careful. No, you know what? I think that the people on the streets understand what, you know, there are people there that love us or hate us. I think Ahmadinejad, you know, is no friend of the United States. No matter what we do, is not going to be our friend. But I think for the President of the United States to make the same statement that President Sarkozy has made, that Chancellor Merkel has made about the need for at least a recount of this election to make sure that we have a legitimate regime in place to deal with.
Well, here's what the president said in his statement on Saturday. The Iranian government must understand that the world is watching. We mourn each and every innocent life that is lost. We call on the Iranian government to stop all violent and unjust actions against its own people. The universal rights to assembly and free speech must be respected, and the United States stands with all who seek to exercise those rights. Congressman Carnahan, do you subscribe to those words? Do you think they're enough?
I think the president struck in the right balance here. You know, we've gotten Iran wrong for a long, long time. And he's had a chance to get it right with a fine balance. He's trying to acknowledge those that are putting their life at risk, to speak out there. He wants to, I think, encourage them, but also what we do can also be used against them if we get it wrong.
What do you make of this? Congressman Coffman, you seem like a smart fella. I'm not being condescending because you sound like it. And here's the question. Don't you know the history of the United States and Iran and how we sort of suck in their eyes over there? They don't like us. They saw what we did when they tried a democratic process back in the 50s, and we pulled a coup with Kermit Roosevelt. The CIA went in there and put the peacock throne in charge. They saw us side with Saddam Hussein against Iran, and some of them believe we're responsible for the weaponry he used, the WMD, which we now used as a reason to go into Iraq, which I know you oppose that war. But we have such a terrible rap sheet when it comes to the people in the streets of Iran. Wouldn't we better to engage in a little benign neglect in terms of our words?
You know, I think that
I mean,
the president,
really, if you were a Democrat, wouldn't you be saying this? Isn't this a partisan assessment you're offering us right now? Because wouldn't you be more respectful of a president if he was in your party right now?
I think that this is an extension of the president's speech in Cairo, and I think it was a brilliant speech. And this is merely following through, taking that next step for what the president said. And I think that the people of Iran that are demonstrating in the streets today expect the leadership from this president.
Well, how do you know that?
I think that if we look at the Iranian people, I think that the younger people, the educated people, tend to be much more pro-American. When we look at some of the ruling elite of Iran, they tend not to be pro-American. And so I think that you know, the people who are our enemies today are going to be our enemies tomorrow. The people who are our friends today, we want to keep as our friends tomorrow.
You don't see any. You don't have any squeamishness about our need not to intervene in their politics. You don't have any sense of nationalism on their side. One problem I've had with the neoconservatives and the Republican Party lately is this almost public ignorance of nationalism. We're nationalistic as hell in this country. We call it patriotism. Don't we know that every other country in the world has something like it, a sense of stay out of our rhubarb, don't mess with our business, it's our election. Would we want anybody involved with our very tricky, sticky 2000 election in this country? And you could argue our Ohio results back in 2004. Would we want the French or Sarkozy or Merkel putting their nose in our business? Would we? Don't you have a sense of projected nationalism and understand that the people of Iran have good reason not to have our nose in their business? It's always been negative.
I think in this instance it could be positive.
Okay.
And I think it can be positive because, and the worry is this: if we have a regime that doesn't have legitimacy, then regimes like that tend to be more aggressive, tend to focus more on external threats. And so I think our own national security interests are on the line on this particular issue, and I think we ought to be on the side of the people on the street.
Do you think we can knock off this government by pushing for a new election?
Well, for one thing, I don't think we should overtly ever talk about regime change, but I think we should talk about a fair and honest recount of this election.
Okay. Let me go back to Congressman Carnan. Your sense of the president's handling of this from A to Z. How's he doing?
I think he's has struck a very difficult balance, but I think that we've got to look for a leadership in this country that we can engage with on some serious matters like their nuclear ambitions. We've got to engage with this 2/3 of their population that are under 30 and use technology. That's the amazing part of this revolution. And to do that in a way that they're finding their voice, they're finding they can make a difference in their lives, and we need to support that effort. It's going to be tricky, but I think the president has done well in terms of his public comments, starting with Cairo, the way people look at us from the Arab world. I think this is an important step in the right direction.
Congressman Coffman, explain to me again how we use our public diplomacy right now and the tougher language you propose to get so we don't have to choose between going to war with Iran and letting them have a nuclear weapon. How does it actually get there? I know you say it'd be nice to take the side of the Mousavi rather than Ahmadinejad. Who wouldn't? Of course we're on his side rather than the other guy. The other guy's our enemy. But how does opposing the other guy at this instance help us get to a point where we don't have to choose between war and that country having a nuclear weapon? How does it get us there?
I don't think we need to talk about taking sides between the candidates. I think what we have to talk about is that natural extension that the Iranian people are looking for based on the president's Cairo speech, and that is he will support emerging democracies wherever they occur. And so his way of supporting this in a very diplomatic tone is, first of all, I think he ought to use condemnation, the word. And secondly, I think he ought to join with President Sarkozy, join with Chancellor Merkel, and talk about the need to have a recount and provide that leadership to coalesce international support, to place pressure, diplomatic pressure on Iran, to hold a recount so that we are dealing and negotiating with a regime that has legitimacy among its population.
And how does a recount, if they'd ever agree to it, which might be far-fetched, but if they did agree to a recount, how would that get us closer to not having to face war with Iran or them having a nuclear weapon?
Well, if we have a recount, we have a new election, and we have a regime
recount
that's seen as being legitimate by its people.
Well, wait a minute. How does a recount get us there? I just don't see how it gets us to avoiding a war or a nuclear weapons in the hands of that guy. How does it get us there?
It does influence that process because if, in fact, I believe that if, in fact, you have an election that is seen as legitimate by its people, the reason why the people are on the street today is because they feel that this election was stolen from them.
Yeah, but how does this get us to avoiding a war or that guy having a nuclear weapon? I care about U.S. interests here, us. How do we get better off by asking for a recount? How does it help us?
When regimes are insecure in their power, when they are unstable, because of their legitimacy, they tend to be focused on external threats, whether it's North Korea or it's Iran, and they tend to be more aggressive more militaristic. And so a way to bring down the temperature is to make sure that we have a regime in place that has legitimacy among its people.
Well, couldn't you argue even more strongly that the more we look like we're trying to interfere with their politics, the more they have a right to build a weapon to use to protect themselves? That seems to be more commonsensical. If we start butting into their business, then this little creep over there, whatever you want to call him, like Ahmadinejad, he gets to say, hey, we need weaponry to fight this big brother who wants to come after us. Your thoughts, Mr. Carnahan?
Exactly. That's the problem here. There's a fine line. If we appear to be meddling too much, that will be used against these reformers. And again, make any efforts for us down the road dealing with whoever the legitimate government is going to make our progress harder.
You know, I just used this as an example for years, and I've supported it. We've gone after Castro, and we've waved the saber at him for, what, 60 years practically. And it's only made that guy more popular among the commies who are still behind him over there, Congressman Coffman. You just make these little guys look bigger by spending all your energy trashing them. It just seems to work that way.
You know, they've had a political process in Iran that's been established. That is, you know, it's a theocracy, but they had elections, and I think there's a legitimate concern among the population that the rules weren't followed in this election. And so it's merely telling you know, Iran that they ought to follow their own processes. And is it meddling at some level? Absolutely. But you know, there are real concerns about the stability of this country, about a country that is probably going to emerge to have nuclear weapons capability.
That's what we're trying to avoid. It's great to have you on. Again, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Congressman Coffman. And thank you, as always, Congressman Russ Carnahan of Missouri. Coming up, President Obama may be in jeopardy of not having the votes